Alright, let's get two things out of the way right before I even begin to get into this video. 1. I'm going to be spoiling the first 4 episodes of The Last of Us show as well as the game. I'm going to be talking about things as if you already know what I'm talking about, so if you choose to watch this even though you haven't seen the show or played the game, then you might be a little bit confused. 2. If you're here for me to reaffirm your homophobic opinions, then the exit is this way. While I am going to be criticizing this show, and yes, that episode, my critiques have nothing to do with representation in the show. If you see that as an issue, then you're no follower of mine, and you're free to leave anytime. Alright, with those two things out of the way, I think The Last of Us show has been pretty disappointing so far. It sucks. I'm disappointed that I'm disappointed. Video game shows and movies have a pretty bad track record, but on paper, The Last of Us seems like it should be the one to work. After all, the game was kind of like playing a movie. The characters were portrayed super realistically, not only through the writing, but also the performances. Everything was motion captured as if they were shooting a real movie, and the acting was so good. They were able to get so much out of these characters and really tug at your heartstrings in a way that no other game I can think of has been able to do. There are scenes in this game that still get me teary-eyed watching them.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
But truth be told, I just don't really think the show understands what made the story in the first game so great. The show is essentially a beat-for-beat remake of the story in the game, yet every single change they've made has been consistently bad in my opinion. I'm going to go through each aspect of the show that I'm not a fan of, starting with Okay, so this isn't necessarily my biggest issue with the show, but it was the first thing I noticed upon watching it. When you compare the events that happen in the show to the game, everything takes so long to get going. Let's compare the opening of the game to the show.
Fight!
In the game, we start with Sarah gifting Joel the watch, having some friendly banter, after which she promptly falls asleep again. Joel carries her upstairs to her room, she wakes up later, and you walk downstairs as Sarah to see Joel, who's super frantic and clearly distressed. He shoots the neighbor who's infected and finally takes Sarah outside to the truck with him. It's direct and to the point. Now let's see how long it takes to get to this exact same point in the show. First we watch some filler talk show in the 60s or 70s or something where the host and the scientist talk about a fungus and how it could be the greatest threat to humanity or something. We then get a title card of the show followed by Joel making breakfast for Sarah in the morning. Tommy's there too, by the way. They all talk and hang out for a while, and then they make their way outside, talk with the neighbors for a little bit, and they all get in the truck and head off. We cut to Sarah in school for a little bit, not really sure why. Then she heads to a watch shop to get Joel's watch fixed. That takes a while, then she goes back home, but not before hanging out with her neighbor for a little bit and making cookies or something. We finally get to the scene where they're on the couch and Sarah gifts Joel the watch. Joel gets a call in the middle of the night to pick up Tommy because he's in jail, I guess, so he leaves. Sarah wakes up in the middle of the night and walks around and turns on the TV and stuff. She then notices the neighbor's dog in front of their house and she goes outside to attempt to return it to the neighbors. She wanders inside of their house where she sees one of the neighbors as an infected zombie. She runs out, Joel is there, he whacks it with a shovel, and they all get in the truck and leave. Do you see the problem here? In the show, this all takes about 25 minutes. You want to know how long it takes in the game? Like 5 minutes, at most. That's it. Now, I can already see the comments. But this is a show, not a game. It has to fill up the runtime with more stuff. To which I say, no, it does not. This show is a remake of the game, and when remaking something, you have to understand why certain decisions were made in the first place. When people make art, they don't leave anything in on accident. Everything is very deliberate, and understanding why certain choices were made is a key part of remaking something. The reason this segment didn't take so long in the game is because Sarah is not an important character. Don't get me wrong, she has her place in the story, but ultimately her inclusion is more for the character of Joel and not for herself. She dies very early in the game and we never see her again, but we see the impact of that death on Joel's character for the entirety of the story. Adding in all this extra content is completely unnecessary to the story of The Last of Us. It's super slow and it's boring. In episode 1, there's the inclusion of the talk show segment, which I briefly talked about, and in episode 2, there's a segment that briefly goes over how the outbreak started in Jakarta. To which I ask, Who cares? The Last of Us is not some masterclass in world building, and it never was. It's a stupid zombie apocalypse setting that's been done to death. I don't want to know how this fictional fungus spread across humanity because that is not and has nothing to do with the story. I actually wouldn't mind there being more world building in the show than there is in the game if it was done more seamlessly, but the way it is here, it's so forced and stilted to the point that I just think it's really annoying. Every addition just slows everything down. As for episode 3, I'm gonna make this as short as I can. As its own little love story thing, I actually didn't mind this at all, but it basically completely sidelined the story to tell this other story about two characters who are basically irrelevant. I really don't see what was wrong about this portion of the game that they had to change it so drastically. In the game, we spend the entire time with Joel and Ellie throughout this segment while learning about Bill's personality and life. So yeah, I found the third episode to be kind of boring and pointless. I would have rather spent more time with Joel and Ellie, but I'm glad that people are enjoying this one. Episode 4 is in my opinion by far the best episode of the show, but I'll get more into that later. For now, I'll just mention that even this episode has a small subplot going on, and I just find that to be a little bit of a distraction. All in all, every addition in the show that wasn't in the game is pretty bad in my opinion. Everything just makes the show bloated and way too long. But like I said earlier, this isn't really my biggest issue with the show. My biggest issue is actually... Alright, so I want to quickly recap what the story of the Last of Us game was. The story is about a man named Joel, who after losing his daughter, becomes a cold-hearted shell of himself who thinks of nothing but surviving and constantly represses his emotions. Sarah died? Let's not talk about it. Tess died? Let's not talk about it. Sam and Henry died? Let's not talk about it. He incidentally ends up smuggling Ellie across the United States, whom he initially could not give a damn for. Throughout the game, Joel is constantly exposed to Ellie, to whom he starts to bond with and see his own daughter in more and more. By the end, even though Ellie could literally be used to cure the zombie apocalypse, he chooses to save her because he loves her more than the world. That is Joel's character arc, in a nutshell. So what exactly is my issue with him in the show, you might be wondering? Well, 1, we are constantly derailed from him thanks to the awful pacing, taking away precious time to develop his character in relationship to Ellie. I already talked about that, so I won't dwell on it. But more importantly, 2, Joel is portrayed as somebody who cares way too much in my opinion. Let's do another comparison real quick. Fight! Remember the scene after Joel, Tess, and Ellie get out of the quarantine zone or whatever where they get tested by that soldier? Well, in the game, this segment is slightly different. Joel and Tess don't really save Ellie from this situation because they like her or something. They save her because she caused a ruckus, and there are multiple soldiers here who probably wouldn't hesitate to shoot and kill all of them. Once they see Ellie is infected, they become extremely suspicious, and there is even a visual implication that they would shoot her right then and there based on her explanation. Now let's look at the show. Well, Joel steps in front of the soldier's gun and then he has a flashback to his daughter's death, and the situation reminds him of his daughter's death, so he tackles the guy and he kills him. Wow. How incredibly lame and on the nose is that? Joel already seems to care about Ellie a lot, which completely destroys the whole point of what his character is. Joel is not supposed to care about Ellie at all. Why is he doing this? Why is this show so transparent and obvious? That was the most egregious example of how his character is messed up in this, but to be brief, I also didn't really appreciate how he appears to be in constant contact with his brother, which wasn't present in the game. He's also portrayed as being slightly closer to Tess than he was in the game, which I didn't like. He's definitely still a cold-hearted dude in this show, but small changes go a big way in altering the character. Episode 2 doesn't really remedy this issue a ton since it's the part of the story where Tess is there and there's a lot less character moments in this episode overall. Episode 3 is just about two completely different characters entirely. But episode 4, okay, now we're getting somewhere. This episode had by far the most character moments between Joel and Ellie. There's a running gag with Ellie reading from her book of puns, which annoys Joel, but he eventually grows to see it as endearing. There's the scene where Ellie saves Joel's life and they have a bonding moment over Joel letting Ellie have her own gun. Also, there's the scene where Joel ends that guy's suffering, and it's brutal and exactly the type of thing I want to see from this character. I want to see that he's not a good person, and I'm glad we got some of that in this episode. I still don't like the subplot that's introduced, but overall, good job, show creators. This was good. Alright, I have one more complaint to cover. This is going to be the shortest segment, but I think it's important. A decent portion of the show is spent on recreating scenes from the game down to the dialogue. These scenes become less frequent as we go through the episodes, but it's still a problem. I think the scenes are just worse in the show. Take the moment where Sarah dies at the beginning of the game. Just pay attention to the performances and tell me which one you think is better.
Oh no. Sarah. Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. God. Listen to me. I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby. I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby. I know. Oh, God. No. No, no, no. Okay. You're okay. You're okay. Move your hand, baby. Move your hand. Oh. I know, baby. I know.
I know it's subjective, but to me the show comes across as a weird imitation of the game. There's plenty of lines of dialogue in the show that are identical to the game, but the delivery is just weird. In the first episode, Ellie and Joel have this little moment where Joel decides to take a nap and Ellie asks Joel what she should do. Take a listen to how the dialogue is delivered in the game as opposed to the show.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
I am sure you will figure that out.
What am I supposed to do?
I'm sure you'll figure that out.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
I am sure you will figure that out.
What am I supposed to do?
I'm sure you'll figure that out.
Why does Joel come across as so much more bitchy? The delivery in the game was so much better because Troy Baker conveyed just how little Joel actually cares about Ellie's entertainment in that moment. But in the show, his tone is implying that he's very irritated by the question. Little things like these are littered throughout the experience, and they're so frustrating because if you've played the game, they're incredibly obvious. It also creates this jarring experience where everything is a mishmash of things you've already seen before mixed in with new things, but the plot beats are still the same. It's a mess. Every time one of these imitated scenes comes up, I'm completely pulled out of the experience. I think that's another reason why I like episode 4 the best. It's true to the game, following the same plot beats, but they reuse the least amount from the game compared to episode 1 and 2. It feels like the actors aren't being forced to imitate something that's already been done great and can instead focus on giving themselves the role. That was long. But in conclusion, I'm kind of disappointed with the show overall. There's some things I like. I enjoyed the casting choices. When they're not imitating lines from the game, they're all doing a pretty good job and Joel looks exactly as he should. The tone is great, and there's one added scene that I enjoyed in the show where they euthanize a child who's infected. It's extremely dark and I think it helps establish the setting. But I don't know. Up until episode 4 I wasn't all too invested, but I really did enjoy episode 4, so we'll see where it goes from here, I guess. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. Leaving a like also helps a lot too. If you want to be up to date on what I'm watching, consider following me on Letterboxd. Also, I made a Twitter. I'll be posting links to new videos as they go up and we'll probably tweet about random stuff too. But that's pretty much it. I love you all. Bye bye.